And welcome back, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement Director, Mr. Scott Angelle, right there. Director Angelle, thank you so much for being here. We promised him the meat and potatoes in this segment, so you're going to jump into it.
Let's go. As one of nine kids growing up in a Cajun family, when I hear meat and potatoes, I know it's time to move. So let's get right into it, right? So I'll slide here. It's just time to fix the shelf. We've talked about some really good results, but primarily those results have been deep water. And those results have carried us. However, we have an opportunity to look at the shelf, that area again, 200 meters or less in water depth. So let's get into some of the statistics. And I have a comparison right here. I think your audience will particularly appreciate this. When we take a look at the shallow water and the deep water, one is 70 years old, one is 45 years old. We've been drilling wells in the shallow water Gulf of Mexico for 70 years. One's mostly gas, one's mostly oil. We've had nearly 50,000 wells drilled in the shallow water. It's a well-picked over province, 5,000 wells drilled in the deep water. And over the last 20 years, we've seen a 61% decrease in producing wells in the shallow water. We've seen oil production down 77%. We've seen gas production down 92% in the last 20 years. Now, I asked the question, where has been the federal government in the last 20 years, and why did it take this administration to hurry up and recognize that, wait a minute, the shallow water province is in steep decline? Take a look at it and compare it to the deep water, where the shallow water was going down, the deep water was going up. 73% increase in producing wells. Oil production up 198%. Gas production flat. And look, I get it. I understand that one of them is old, so it's going to have a little bit less opportunity to produce the kind of resources that the newer, fresher one, perhaps more complex geology. But one of the things we've got to understand, when you have anything that's going down 77%, in 20 years or 92% in 20 years, it would appear that the federal government should be pushing some kind of policy change to affect it, because at the end, these resources are owned by the country. They under lease to an oil company, but they're owned by the country. And they go a long way in providing a lot of benefits to the country. One of the things that I recently heard, don't know, I can't confirm it, but that offshore oil revenue is the second largest source of revenue to the federal treasury, only behind income taxes. That's incredible. So if you got these numbers going down and down and down, why wouldn't you, as a management regime, take a look at what might you do differently? Well, this administration has been there 2.5 years. We set out about 15 months ago to take a look at the data. We dug, and again, want to get into perhaps the next slide as well. So this kind of gives you an idea. Then before you go into the next slide, let me just say this as well. That last part, I think, is very important. The number of platforms, if you take a look at the number of platforms, there were nearly 7,000 platforms, infrastructure that have been installed, and 5,102 removed. So about 1,700 left or so. Okay, look at the last 5 years. The first number I gave you was the numbers from the beginning, since 1947. Let's take a look at the shallow water for the last 5 years. There's 516 that have been removed and 13 that have been installed. Now, I didn't finish top of my class at Brobridge High, but I can tell you the math here is pretty clear, right? When you got 516 coming out and you only got 13 going in over a 5-year period of time, it's only a matter of time before we get to the end, and there will be no more infrastructure. That's an important. Let's go to the next slide. So we all aware of the long, distinguished history of the Gulf of Mexico shallow water. Again, we know about the number of wells been drilled, nearly 48,000 wells been drilled, nearly 7,000 platforms installed, tens of thousands of jobs, and it helped fuel America. And the activity that was being hosted here in the shallow water helped give rise to the economies of Cameron, Abbeville, Delcambre, New Iberia, Patterson, Berwick, Golden Meadow, Morgan City, Houma, Grand Isle, Lafayette, Galliano, Cutoff, LaRose, Leeville, and many more. Again, no doubt, that has been the long, distinguished history. Let's take a look at the more recent history on the next slide. The next slide clearly shows that the more recent history, with everybody who is viewing, who's lived in this area, already knew that we went through a period from about 1982 to more recently where, that shallow water area just went down and down and down. You see some of the headlines going back to 1986 from the Morgan City newspaper, from the Houma newspaper. Just really, that is an article from the New York Times there. Oil gloom in land of Cajuns, 1982. We bounced back a little bit from that, but clearly the shallow water decline has been in play for a period of time, and now it's time, as I would say, to fix the shelf. Let's go to the next slide. So what do we do? So the information that I provided for you before, clearly everybody in Houma, everybody in Terrebonne, Lafourche Parish already knew it. I'm here to tell you today, to your audience, that your government now knows it. Your government put together a report that details these kind of findings in a way that allows us to be actionable. Again, you can know it, you can feel it, but unless you can put it down in writing and have it well vetted by experts, you can't change policy in the country. And this is what we're looking to do here. So on the next slide, the findings of that report, again, bring out the fact that in the shallow water, we've had a decrease of 89% of the number of wells drilled. We looked at the number of platforms installed and removed. You see in that third bullet point, the oil production in the shallow water alone decreased 77% in the last 20 years, and natural gas production down 92% in the last 20 years. Again, if you had all of those decreases on the vital statistics of your grandma, you would say, hey, Momo's in trouble right here. Look, we got to do something right here. And that's what the shallow water represents. Shallow water represents something that's older, 70 years old perhaps, right? That's had some issues and going down and down and down, and it's time to fix the shelf. But it's important. It's important, Martin, to say, well, wait a minute. If it's old and it's well picked over, maybe there's nothing left. That next bullet is so important to this discussion. Our sister agency, which handles the economics for us, estimates that there's $20 billion, $20 billion with a B, of potential stranded values of oil and natural gas resources in water depths less than 200 meters based on October 1st, 2019 NYMEX pricing. This is not some number that was put together when prices were $140 a barrel or $13 per MCF of gas. This is October 1st, 2019 pricing. And they estimate that we have about $20 billion of assets that are stranded. They're not big elephant-sized reservoirs. They're really small, kind of rabbit-sized reservoirs that if we can structure a program and a royalty that's competitive, we can go get those. We can make sure that we're not leaving those in the ground. And that's what we're called to do. And then additionally, there's some findings that we have new competition from
But it's
Mexico.
in shallow water, so what is Louisiana's cut compared to deep water?
Well, basically what you have in terms of, there's two things here, right? So one of them I would share with you is not so much the cut as much as it is getting the production available to the country, making that production available to the country, creating those jobs, creating that royalty opportunity for the country. Then those monies go into a pot from a royalty standpoint and are shared through, I think the most significant piece of legislation is the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act. And some of those resources are then shared with the state and the parishes in a formula. Again, the bigger the pie, the better chance we have to get other folks across the nation saying, let's give more to Louisiana, in as much as Louisiana has dedicated this.
Hence, we're trying to get to 50%.
Yeah,
that could get us there.
Right,
yeah.
right, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Great.
So next slide. So again, just kind of finishing up on some of these additional findings, I will share with you that it's important to understand on the shallow water, in the shallow water area, that our sister agency sets the lease rate on future lease sales, and they have set that at 12.5%. But in spite of that, in spite of having a 12.5% royalty rate, which is a value the companies would pay to the country, in spite of that, the August 2019 lease sale, which just happened several months ago, offered 5,375 blocks in the shallow water, and only 19 blocks received bids, approximately 1/3 of 1%. Again, I didn't finish first in my class, but I guarantee you, if you had 5,375 watermelons on the side of the road for sale and you only sold 19, you couldn't have too many days like that. There's not a lot of interest in the shallow water in terms of new leasing. The solution is not to offer royalty relief on new leases. We believe the solution is to allow royalty to be reduced on existing leases in exchange for new wells being drilled. That's smart public policy. Let's walk through the next slide, and I'll give you some additional information on that. Again, we believe that in these findings that it's important to know that while, again, we had this long and distinguished history of being this really great shallow water place that gave rise to these communities, like I said earlier, the Gulf of Mexico is viewed by many of the financial markets as one of the least desirable basins in the USA. Again, 70 years, well picked over province, a lot of challenges, and it's affecting folks who have service company, workboats, equipment rental, logistics, and food service companies, all of those who are being negatively affected. So as a result of all this research, so what is the director doing? He's talking fast, he's coming at it with a lot of information. What do we do? The research, Martin, put us in a position to look at these vital stats, and our sister agency, BOEM, did a great job, went back into the locker room and said, you know what? We allow a typical 15% discount rate for royalty relief applications, and we're doing a 15% across the board, shallow water and deep water. But you know what? Based on this data and based on all this research, we now believe what Scott's been saying, that the shallow water and the deep water are acting as two different provinces, that you might as well be on two different planets when you look at them. So we can't manage them with a one-size-fits-all. And as a result of that, they recently issued, effective today, I believe, a new water depth specific discount rate. And the previous was a maximum of 15% for all Gulf of Mexico. And now what they've said is, no, for shallow water, we're going to allow a discount rate of 25%. And the discount rate then plugs into the eligible royalty rate, which we believe will attract capital, which we believe when we can attract that capital, we can get prospects that are uneconomic to become economic. And then all again, as Senator Chabert said this morning, you can get 20% of nothing and still end up with nothing, right? Any number times zero is zero, right? And so the idea is that if we could lower the royalty rate based on science, based on economics, based on geology, right, then we could get a smaller percentage of something. And again, I think that we're on to something here. Certainly, several of the companies have expressed some interest in this. And if we get to the next slide.
But doesn't this fit, before you move, doesn't this fit into President Trump's overall way he looks at things? Give them incentives, make it worth their while to go and make more money, because in the long run, they're going to generate a lot more money.
No doubt. And one of the things you'll love about this is that what we're talking about has nothing to do with granting royalty relief on existing production.
Right.
This is not corporate welfare.
This is new stuff.
This is about drilling a new well.
Right.
It's tied to the drilling of a new well, which gets a boat company moving, which gets somebody hired, which gets automobiles purchased, which gets mud bought and pipe sold, and all those things associated with it.
Gets those boats off the ropes.
Absolutely. So we're excited because we tied it, and I have a slide that clearly shows it's tied to new wells.
Let's go to the next slide if we could.
So again, I'm gonna flow through these pretty quickly.
Okay.
This particular slide shows the shallow water. Again, areas less than 200 meters. The blue lines, the ones I want you to focus on this one is a busy slide, and this particular slide just shows that the total discoveries in that particular area in the shallow water have been going smaller, getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It's a well picked over province, and we got to do something differently to get a different result. Next slide. Again, this shows you the number of leases, the number of active leases in 200 meters or less. Okay, you go back over, you kind of get a peak in 1991, about 4,400 leases. Look at what has happened. Look at what has happened. And guess what? Even though the price of oil went up, and the price of natural gas went up, the number of leases that were acquired in the shallow water didn't go up. It continued to go down. So again, it's more than just price. It's more than just price. Next slide. Again, this is the active leases by royalty rate. Again, very busy. The green bars show that those leases have a 16 2/3 royalty rate. The purple show that it has an 18 3/4 royalty rate. And you get to see that the vast majority of the leases in 200 meters of water or less or the high royalty rate of 16 2/3. Doesn't work anymore. Was once competitive, is not competitive anymore. We need to be smart and adjust our policy. Otherwise, we end up with stranded assets. Next. And this shows you the number of producing versus non-producing leases. If you take a look over in the left-hand side, 1983, 85, 87, companies had some producing leases, but they were also holding and perhaps doing seismic on a bunch of non-producing leases. Okay, that's the top bar, the kind of a pink color. When you go over to the right-hand side, not only are they not produced, they don't have as many active leases, they're basically getting rid of their inactive leases, not really interested in doing seismic on those leases, have basically given up on the area. That's a very telling sign. This is the kind of data, when you ask the right questions, you can plot some really, really incredible data. And then this just shows the Gulf of Mexico oil production by water depth. If you take a look at the purple line is oil production going up. You see it up and up and up and up. You see it have some problems during the hurricanes. The green line, the one going down there, that green line shows oil production in the shallow water. And again, that's going down. How much more does it need to go down, right, How much more does it need to go down before it goes off the grid here? So I think the next one, that's oil production. The next slide is gas production. You see the same thing. You just see natural gas production just going down and down and down, and it's almost off the graph at this point. Next. And then this last slide, I believe, just kind of shows the number of wells drilled and the shelf wells producing. So if you take a look at the top blue slide deck, you see, again, since 1947, we have been going down and down and down and down in number of wells drilled in the shelf. And then you see the number of producing wells in the purple, the lower graph, again, just any number of a decline in the number of producing wells. It does not take long for a businessman to see these kind of graphs and quickly tell a manager of resources and quickly say, you got to do something different or you're going to end up in a bad spot. I alluded a little bit earlier to the number of platforms being installed and being removed. You know, you got to have new platforms, Martin, to be installed to keep it going. Last year, there were 97 platforms removed in the shallow water. There was no new platforms installed last year. I think the year before that, there was one. This slide clearly shows a significant number of platforms being removed on the top dotted line and very, very few being installed. And again, this didn't start yesterday. You know, this administration has been in there for a couple years. This started going back, let's look at 2008. And you got to ask yourself, where was the federal government when they were seeing these numbers? You know, of course, I come from an area that lives these numbers. Mm-hmm. I know people who struggle through these numbers. So I didn't waste any time, and I didn't take no for an answer in terms of let's continue to ask a series of questions.
I bet if you put these graphs directly to car sales and people moving out of Houma in there, it would correlate almost
absolutely.
Exactly.
I can go get you the sales tax receipts here at the sales tax office. Mm-hmm. I can go look at the automobile sales. I can go take a look at the real estate sales, and I guarantee you overlay it, you're going to see the same exact cycles. Now, I think we're a little bit more diversified then, but as you said in the opening segment of the feature story here, is that as so goes the oil and gas industry, so goes Terrebonne and Foos Parish.
All right, I want to hold that thought. Let me take one more quick break. We'll come back, and we're going to make another run and show you some very interesting things. And there's a time lapse kind of thing that Scott put together. You won't want to miss that. It really tells you a whole story in a little over 30 seconds. We'll be right back.